that people can hear me. Sometimes that can be a bit of an issue. And so let's see. Well, anyway, I'll have a go and hopefully people can hear me. If not, I might have to come back and do it again. So if people can't hear me, if you could just let me know in the comments section, that'd be great. So firstly, before I share this short essay, which is by Angel Flynn from Gentle World, that's gentleworld.org, it's called Mother's Milk. And I don't know if some of you may or may not be aware that that dairy is the result of mothers having their milk taken from them that was meant for their child and then given to us. We're probably the only species that drinks the secretions of another species like this. And then she also has her children taken away from her so that this milk can be collected, and male calves more often than not are taken to a slaughterhouse at 4 months old and are killed. That's the normal runnings of any dairy industry. And with male chicks from hens in the hatcheries, male chicks are when they're sorting them, female and male, they throw the male chicks into a macerator, which is a large machine that grinds them up alive. And that's the sort of that's what happens to male chicks. In the dairy industry, it's a very, very sad experience for mothers. And so if you can just let me know, Zachary, if you can hear me okay, so that I'm not just speaking speaking to nobody, or even Rob. So if somebody could just let me know if you can hear me okay. I assume that little thumbs up means that you can hear me. So, okay, let me know if you can't. So anyway, I'm going to share this essay, and it's called Mother's Milk. Quote, all dairy operations, whether conventional or organic, exist solely by doing to millions of defenseless females the worst thing anyone can do to a mother, end quote. That's a quote by Peaceful Prairie Sanctuary. Every year in the month of May, the arrival of Mother's Day marks an occasion to reflect on not only the love of our own mothers, but the essence of motherhood itself and what it means for us and our culture. But as we send cards, flowers, gifts, and poetry to the women in our lives who have cared for and nurtured us, we are perhaps overlooking an opportunity to look more honestly at our society's hypocrisy when it comes to the same profound relationship among members of other species. Humans are far from the only animals to experience the deep connection between mother and child. In fact, this might be one of the very experiences that is universal, crossing all boundaries between species. And yet somehow we manage to suppress our awareness of this all-important bond when it involves individuals who are different from us, especially when acknowledging this fact would require us to make a change in our own behavior, such as eliminating our dependence on the products of animal husbandry. It is impossible to separate our use of animals as economic resources from our exploitation of their reproductive systems. After all, there would be no animal industries, whether on a small or a large scale, without ongoing breeding and birthing. When domesticated animals become mothers, their children belong to someone else. And not only are they nearly always separated from their young shortly after birth, but they have no power whatsoever over the future their child will be forced to endure. Although this is true for all animals living under the oppressive regime of human control, from, quote, layer, end quote, hens to, quote, pet, end quote, dogs, nowhere is it more apparent or more brutal than with cows being used for dairy production. Not only do dairy cows experience an enforced repetitive cycle of insemination, pregnancy, and birthing, But once their young are taken away, often to be killed for veal production, they are subjected to the ongoing pillaging of the parts of themselves that are designed to nurture and to nourish the children they have lost. This is how we obtain the milk that is consumed all over the world, whether the cows are factory farmed, organic, free range, grass fed, or, quote, humanely raised, end quote. Dairy milk is produced by a mother cow's body to feed her baby, just as human milk is produced for the same purpose. Humans are the only animal that consumes milk after weaning, and we are the only animal that consumes the mammary milk of another species. The only thing that keeps us from consuming it en masse is the fact that we continue to the only thing that keeps us consuming it en masse is the fact that we continue to deny that this is an extremely bizarre and barbaric practice. But it is bizarre, barbaric, and tragic for the victims of the industry we have created to feed our insatiable appetite for a substance our bodies can barely tolerate. Peaceful Prairie Sanctuary has a description of the experience of mothering as it happens for millions of cows every year. Here is an excerpt. Quote, "Some try to fight off their attackers, some try to shield their babies with their own bodies, some chase frantically after their transport, some cry pitifully, some withdraw in silent despair. Some go trustingly with their keepers only to return to an empty stall. They all beg for their babies, in language that requires no translation. They bellow, they cry, they moan. Many continue to call for their babies for days and nights on end. Some stop eating and drinking, they search feverishly. Many refuse to give up and will return to the empty spot again and again. Some withdraw in silent grief. At 4 months old, the, quote, veal, end quote, calves are corralled into trucks and hauled to slaughter. As they are dragged onto the killing floor, they are still looking for their mothers, still desperately needing her nurturing presence, especially at the dark time when they are frightened and needing protection more than ever in the midst of the terrible sights and sounds and scents of death all around them. And in their despair, in their want for a shred of consolation and protection, most try to suckle the fingers of their killers. As we reflect, and that's the end quote from Peaceful Prairie Sanctuary, from the Milk Comes from a Grieving Mother. As we reflect on the powerful relationship that links a mother to her child, we have an opportunity to try and see other animals for who they really are, and to attempt to understand what they must mean to each other, to the family members they are linked with, and whom they have need of on the most fundamental level. When babies are terrified for their lives, when mothers are grieving for their stolen young, they may not be human, they may be cows, pigs, sheep, or elephants, but to each other, they are simply mother and child. So that's thank you, Cher, for that comment. Happy Mother's Day to you too. And of course, mother comes in many forms, doesn't it? Because not only mothers who are non-human, but I mean, not everybody has a mother. Not everybody gets on with their mother, and mothers can be whomever you think is somebody who represents nurturing and care and love. So that's something that, we all hopefully have someone like that, whether they be a friend or something like that, someone like that. Whether they're a non-human whom we live with and we find them very nurturing and caring. So anyway, that's a sort of a very sad description of what we're putting non-human animals, in this particular instance, mother cows, through for completely unnecessary reasons. Because, as I've said on my other live streams on Real Progressives, in veganism, about veganism, that, we don't need animal products at all to survive. We can easily meet all our nutrition requirements from plants and other non-animal sources. So the only reason we have for using these animal products and for eating, wearing, and using animals is because it's convenient, or it's traditional, or it's just something that we're used to, or we've been indoctrinated to do so, or for our palate pleasure. But what we haven't realized yet is that we don't need to do that, and in fact, it's causing so much violence. 1 trillion land and aquatic animals are killed, tortured and killed every year for completely trivial reasons of mostly palate pleasure. So, the tremendous amount of violence that we're participating in if we continue to eat animal products, that's meat, dairy, eggs, honey, etc. And if we wear animal products, wool, leather, fur, silk, etc., and just in general using animals, the tremendous violence, and really they're sentient just like we are. They're sentient just like we are, and they love life. They have relationships where they're young, as you saw in that description of the grieving mother having her child removed from her, which is the common practice in the dairy industry. That's what the dairy industry is. That's how they get their milk and other dairy products, is from removing children from the mothers at a day old or whatever, and the mother goes in this terrible grieving. In fact, earlier on today, because I live in a rural area. Hi, Gopal, how are you? Um, I live in a rural area in Tasmania, and I'm surrounded by animal agriculture here. Everywhere you drive, there's fields of, we don't have the big intensive feedlots here, and they use that to sell these products in sort of calling it humane, grass-fed, and in quotes, and all that sort of thing. But still, I get to witness what happens for these animals, and I know in the end they all wind up in the same awful slaughterhouses. But I heard early on today, I heard a lot of different cows bellowing, and I recognized that particular sound they make. It's usually when they've had their Happy Mother's Day to you, Gopal. When they've had their children taken from them. And that's the sort of awful sound, and it carries out through all over the valley. I live in the Huon Valley, and you can hear this bellowing all throughout the valley. And I've seen it with my own eyes, because a few years ago, before I moved here, and this is where I live now, but before that I was renting, and we live right in the middle of a dairy farm. In a way, it was sort of like we were surrounded almost on 3 sides with this dairy farm, and every day I would see these cows with these bursting udders walking down behind one another in a line. They weren't being rounded up, but they were going down because their udders were so painful from being full of milk. I mean, they're genetically bred and given growth hormones and stuff, and their udders are much larger than they would normally be naturally. So they're extremely large and very, very painful, and they often get mastitis. It's a really, really uncomfortable thing. So the mother cows, they go. This is by the way in these the you see the happy cow ads. Happy cows. That's the thing you see everywhere on billboards. Happy cows and their milk, and they're smiling and they're prancing around in the fields. I mean, seriously, that's just a scam to sell, sort of quote unquote organic products. But anyway, so I see these cows walking down in a line. I saw them every day. And their children, where were their children? They were, you could see them every so often being in this particular fenced area. You'd see the young calves in this fenced area separated from their mother. And they'd obviously, when I used to see them, they'd stopped crying, but, they would be crying. And I've seen them when they literally separate the calves from their mothers on these dairy farms, and I've seen the mothers all corralled in an area, and they're crying and bellowing, and the calves are being taken away in a truck, and they're beside themselves, absolutely beside themselves. And this is dairy. This is not this is the so-called happy cows. I've witnessed it with my own eyes, and I could read you horrific descriptions of what goes on in organic dairy farms. So you can imagine if the so-called happy cows on the organic dairy farms, imagine, in these feedlots, the dairy feedlots, equally awful. And in some cases, they have downer cows. They call them downers, where dairy mothers, literally, they get too weak to walk, and they get these big bulldozers and lift them up and tip them into I don't know what they do with them, but it's a dreadful thing, these downer cows. The terrible things that we do to non-human animals who are so, that their only crime is that they were born another species. Really, that's the only crime. They're born another species and they cannot defend themselves. They don't really harm anybody. They're just existing and trying to have a life, and we've bred them into existence to keep for completely trivial reasons. I've been vegan for 13 years, and I'm not placing any judgment on anybody. I was non-vegan for 45 years of my life. I've been vegan for 13 years, and it's the best decision I've ever made. I think now of all the animals that they've been killed for me because I've created demand for animal products, or all the calves who have been taken from their mothers and killed when they're very, very young and can barely walk. The horrific thing I put them through because I created demand for dairy. And since I've been vegan, I probably went... I found it was actually the description of dairy that I accidentally came across online, where I just was horrified. I had never thought about dairy. I always thought, it's so sort of silly of me to think this way, but I just assumed animals are here for us. They're kind of lesser in a way, even though I had fondness for them, and I thought, and I would, I would sort of do anything to help an animal who was in trouble. But I sort of saw them as our resources. It was not even a conscious thing. It's just I've been so indoctrinated to think, that way, that they are here for us to use. We're all indoctrinated, aren't we, to think that way? We're indoctrinated to think that, we're also sort of led to believe that dairy cows are having a lovely time, and that they never get killed, and their children are never taken from them, and that we just don't think about these things. We don't think, well, how is it that their udders are always full, and we get milk all the time? The reason their udders are full is because their children are taken from them, and if they're male calves, they're killed. That's how they have the milk, and all the cheese that we eat and all the yogurt. It's the same thing. That's a result of these mothers having their children taken from them and crying for days. And I've seen it with my own eyes. This isn't hyperbole. This is real. And I think, oh my God, I think, wow. I would, because I loved eating cheese and yogurt and stuff like that. Like many people, it's got fat in it, and we're animals too, and we like to eat fat. Of course, there's fat in plant-based diets, of course, good fat. It's not cholesterol-ridden fat that, is killing us. But, I loved dairy when I was non-vegan, but it took no time before I didn't miss it. But the fact is now that if you are into that, there's lots of plant-based cheeses, in quotes, and there's plenty of plant-based milks. I do, use nut milk and sometimes soy milk. We have organic soy milk here. So there's plenty of actual dairy alternatives if you want that, like cheese, plant-based cheeses, and they're getting better and better all the time, and they're much better for you. So really, even if you're into that, you're not going to miss out. But the thing is, the thing that when you internalize the ethical position about veganism, if you like, when I see the milk cartons in the fridges, and there's rows and rows and rows of them, um, you know and then you see all the cheeses and stuff. All I see now in the supermarkets when I see that is crying mothers and young calves being killed in slaughterhouses and crying for their mothers and sucking on the fingers of the slaughterhouse workers, or being put on a truck for 24 hours without any nutrition at all, which is a common practice. When they take animals to slaughter, they often starve them for 24 hours and don't give them any water or anything. And in fact, if it's just sort of the common practice, and they can travel for longer than that in this blazing heat or the freezing cold. The myth of it, when we hear this whole animal welfare thing, and animal welfare is only talked about in terms of making industry economically efficient. Animal welfare, if it was applied to humans, would be considered torture. So when you hear that animal welfare, the welfare standards, we have good welfare standards for animals. If you actually looked at the welfare standards for animals, they would be torture if they were applied to humans. So let's remember that when we hear these so-called, they were quote unquote humanely raised and all that kind of thing. Just remember that it's torturous practices that they say they're doing, even though they don't really describe this to the public. But it's torture for animals, and it's just really there to make us believe and soothe our conscience so we can continue using animals and using animal products. So it's really a deception so that they can continue selling us animal products and telling us that it's humanely raised, and these happy cows on the lovely farms, and they live happy lives, yada yada yada. It's just all a deception. And in the end, even if they had the most fantastic lives and they had people walking around with them and patting them and feeding them this and that, it doesn't matter, because we're still treating them like their resources, like their property, and they're not property. They're not slaves. They're not non-human slaves. They're sentient beings, just like you and I, who love life, who do not want to die. They love life. They relate to one another, to the environment. They have their likes and dislikes, and they are just like the non-human animals whom we live with. It's just that we don't have a personal relationship with them like we do with the non-humans we live with. And by the way, if you as a vegan, I encourage people to adopt and foster non-human animals from shelters like dogs, cats, rabbits, rats, mice, etc. Any non-humans who are refugees of domestication, I encourage people to look after and give a long, secure and happy, loving, sort of life with. So that's something I just wanted to mention there. So maybe maybe on Mother's Day you could go to a shelter and adopt a non-human animal, a refugee of domestication, and give them a loving home for their life, because so many domesticated dogs, cats, etc., are killed in shelters, millions of them every year, and even the lucky ones still live in a sort of a never world in some ways, where they're sort of basically under our control. Even if we really love them, they're still under our control, and they don't have really much of their own agency. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. So really the point I wanted to make about animals is to think that mother cows and other mother goats, etc., they all love their young just like we do. and they are desperately grief stricken when their child is taken from them. And we can avoid that kind of dreadfulness, that kind of awful, awful, awful sort of almost like the Sophie's Choice thing. We can avoid that by becoming vegan and ceasing our demand for these products of great violence and great bereavement. We can avoid participating in that by simply making the decision in our hearts and in our minds to go vegan and reject this slavery, which is what it is. It's a slavery of another species, and we don't need to do it at all. And in fact, not only don't we need animal products, but they're killing us. You've probably watched Jeff Ginter, right? Hi, Beverly. Hi, Brenda. You've probably watched Jeff Ginter talk about just recently. He and Rocio did a live stream about some of the health aspects in relation to a plant-based diet, and some of the and also touched a little bit on ethics. And it's I'm hoping to do something actually with Jeff Ginter. He's vegan, so is Rocio, and I was hoping to do something with Jeff Ginter in the next in about a month's time, after he's going to be interviewing some people, and then maybe we'll get together and we'll do some specific things about certain things to do with health in relation to a plant-based diet, but also some of the very scary things that one can be subjecting one's body to when one eats animal products. And some of it, you'll be really amazed at what we are putting ourselves through when we ingest animal products. Just to give you a little idea, there's a thing called endotoxemia, and basically when you eat animal flesh, doesn't matter how much you cook it, you can boil it for like 4 hours, but it doesn't really get rid of all the pathogens in it. They've discovered, and this is science-based, okay? This is from nutritionfacts.org, and I'll leave a link in that. You can look it up, and it gives a much better explanation than I do. But you can actually boil the bejesus out of a piece of flesh, a piece of meat, and the pathogens still exist. And when you ingest that meat, it actually causes an instant inflammatory response in your body, because the pathogens kind of are released, and your body then is in this state of inflammation. And so you're basically in a constant state of inflammation when you're ingesting meat products. I'm not sure if that's the same with dairy, but there's a whole other thing going on with dairy that's really frightening. But anyway, but with meat products, you're in a constant state of inflammation. So it's no wonder, that's one reason of many why we're so susceptible to all these different illnesses and diseases. So that's something to think about. But that's called endotoxemia, and that's an actual science-backed thing that happens to us. Okay, so anyway, I'm getting way off the track now. I'm talking about health, and that's something that I don't focus on, because veganism is an ethical position. And so, and if we internalize the ethical position, we're going to want to, if we, like I said, when I see lots and lots of rows of milk cartons on the in the shelves at the supermarket, I don't see food. I see a terrible suffering. I see mothers without their children, mothers that are crying and grieving, and this is a repeated cycle. The same mother has to go through repeated pregnancies so she can provide milk for the industry, and she's repeatedly has her children removed from her. And they're either enslaved like the female calves, or they're killed like the male calves. And so that's what I see when I see the supermarket shelves and all the milk there. And when I go outside and at certain times of the year, and I hear cows with that specific bellowing, which is sort of a high pitched, and it travels across the valley, I think, God, this could be avoided. This terrible sadness and bereavement could all be avoided if all of us just went vegan, because we're creating demand for that terrible suffering all over the world. All over the world, we're creating demand for a terrible torture and a terrible suffering and mass killing. I mean, there are more non-human animals killed in 4 days on the planet for animal products, mostly for food, than all humans killed in history, murders, genocides, plagues, and that kind of thing. More non-humans killed in 4 days than all of that humans killed in history for plagues, genocides, murders, etc. So isn't it it's hard to wrap your head around the violence there. And of course, I haven't even touched on the environmental impact, which, if you've ever watched Cowspiracy, the sustainability secret, it has amazing information. Like, seriously, the one that sort of really popped out for me when I watched Cowspiracy was I used to get this stat wrong, but I've got it right now, but 1 acre of Amazon rainforest every minute is cleared for animal agriculture. 1 acre of Amazon rainforest every minute is killed for animal agriculture and for soy that is grown. Soy is grown for animals overseas in feedlots. So that's a frightening kind of a statistic, isn't it? And there's and we can quibble about the percentage, but 51% of greenhouse gases are from animal agriculture. That's what the World Watch Institute says. And I think a lot of people are actually waking up to that. And there's more and more of that. You can look online. Chris Hedges did a really good essay on it, which was it described the various things about animal agriculture. Yeah, Cowspiracy, Kathy. Yes, it's really sort of astounding, the statistics. And I mean, I hope people go vegan for ethical reasons, meaning because non-human animals are not our property. But I hope that. But I think that if people watch, like I know that some people watch Cowspiracy and they go vegan. If you can say go vegan, they adopt a plant-based diet. I'd prefer people go vegan for ethical reasons, meaning I prefer them to realize that non-humans are not property. But I mean, hopefully people who go vegan because they see Cowspiracy, hopefully they'll internalize the whole ethical thing. So anyway, that's really all I wanted to say, and I appreciate you joining in. I realize it's sort of early today on the east coast of the US, and it's about it's almost 10 p.m. here at night. And but I've been feeling quite sort of a bit guilty that I've been very busy doing some things, and I haven't been able to do a specific vegan live stream for a few weeks. And that makes me feel bad, because every day I'm aware that there are so many non-humans being killed so unnecessarily, and I see it all around me, all these lovely cows across the road and up the street, all these lovely cows that I just know that they're there. Everybody sees them and thinks, aren't they lovely? But I know what, they're just there until the people decide, that whoever owns them, in quotes, decides it's time to kill them. And then they're put in the back of a truck, and then they're taken off to a slaughterhouse and killed. And so they're basically just there and being fattened up. I mean, these are sentient beings being kept in fields in the rain and the heat and whatever. I mean, there was a terrible downpour yesterday. And I was thinking, these animals, they have to just endure the heat and the rain and the cold. It's getting cold, and they just have to stand there in the rain because there's nowhere really to shelter. And this is what we put them through. And these are probably what people would consider the lucky ones, in the fields. They're not. And and eventually they get taken off and they're killed. And it's just so sad. And I think, this could all be avoided. So, um, and thanks, Beverly. Thank you for joining in. And thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Cher. And so if you have any questions at all, um, please don't hesitate to contact me. Um, and when I talk about this, sometimes people get some people, it looks like people are handling it today, but sometimes people can get very upset and they think this is some sort of a judgment or something that somebody is, by talking about this, literally by talking about it, which I just consider education, that's passing a judgment on people. Well, no, it's not really, because I mean, we all, a lot of us don't get to hear this message, and sometimes when we do, it's a confused message. Um, and it's sort of baby steps and cut down on meat and all this kind of stuff. That's confused message, and it's really not helpful to anybody. But when we hear it, sometimes it can be a bit of like somebody's throwing cold water in your face. It's sort of like it's a bit of a shock, and then suddenly some people get very defensive, and they start going through all this list of, oh, but what about plants, and oh, but what about the Inuits? Well, you're not an Inuit, you're not a herder, you're not in that position. So what about it? I could go through all these things and talk about it, but I won't today. But it's sort of, they go through all these lists of things, and I think, gee, just relax. It's okay. You don't need to search for these excuses, because like, we can do it right now. You and I can do it right now. We can go vegan, and we can stop participating in this tragic, terrible violence. And the world doesn't the world need more nonviolence? I mean, seriously, we all need more nonviolence in the world. There's so much now that is violent. I don't know about you, but sometimes I can barely handle it. I find the way the world is these days, the terrible imperialist wars that are brought upon completely innocent brown people in all these Middle Eastern countries, killing them and destroying their lives and giving their children cancer through depleted uranium and all this. I talk about this in other live streams. I can't stand it, because where is our humanity? And when we become vegan, we can take control of some of that. We can actually reduce the violence in our own lives significantly. And it can't help but inform the rest of our life, because if you care about, if you care about the vulnerable, like the non-human animals who have really no voice, really, they don't, and the voices they do have are often confused. Like the humans that speak up for animals are often sort of like, you would never suggest the sort of things that people in large animal organizations, many of them, are suggesting. You wouldn't say that in a human rights sense. You wouldn't suggest people treat humans humanely, as in don't abuse humans 3 days a week, but abuse them, or don't abuse children 4 days a week and then be kind to them. Whatever. It's sort of, you wouldn't be suggesting humane child slavery, but for some reason we have this, even when we think that we're advocating for animals, it's often speciesist, and we would never be advocating the same things for humans. So, most of us don't get to hear a really clear vegan message, and that's what I try to do when I talk about this. And if you're really disturbed by what's happening to to humans in the world, the imperialist wars that we're doing, and all the other oppression, the terrible things that Black people are experiencing in the United States. 3 people killed every day, by the state, with impunity and all that kind of stuff. Indigenous people having their land destroyed and being treated like crap, like garbage. I mean, all this sort of stuff. It sometimes becomes really overwhelming, but we have to, keep on, even when it seems like it's like the David and Goliath thing, even when it seems like that. And sometimes I feel like that with veganism, although in the last 13 years, I've noticed a tremendous exponential growth in veganism. But, we must keep on trying to promote nonviolence and also education. Grassroots public education is key. Grassroots public education, if we're advocating for people to understand what their politicians can do in relation to understanding, MMT. That's a really important thing because that will have liberating aspects to it, and it's so important to end neoliberalism. And if we want to end this terrible animal slavery and the terrible and the far-reaching effects of that, which is more and more violence. I mean, it just doesn't stay in a vacuum what we do to non-human animals. If we advocate for veganism clearly and we don't, mealy mouth it, if we're clear on things and if we're clear on things, then we're going to get clarity in response, hopefully. So that's what we have to do. We have to be clear and morally consistent. And I know I'm not always very spot on with my. Sometimes I'm clear, and sometimes I speak well, and sometimes I'm a meander, like today. I'm a little bit tired, but hopefully I'm getting across something, and hopefully it's not too repetitious. But sometimes it needs repetition to get to really sort of impress. Sometimes you have to repeat a message in various ways, but in a clear, morally consistent way. You have to do it over and over again to get it across. So if we all become vegan, then there'll be a massive shift in consciousness in the world. A vegan planet will be an amazing planet. And even in the UK right now, 7% of the population identifies as vegan. That might not be completely, they say they identify as vegan. That's 3 million people, 3.5 million people. So, it's really starting to exponentially grow, and it's not a fringe philosophy anymore. So, there'll be more and more vegans in the world, and what a great world it will be. That's what I think, and a lot of vegans think that. I know that Jeff Ginter thinks that. I know that Rocio Manzuto thinks that. There's a whole lot of people now who are getting on board with that, and I invite you to join in on that. And I have hold on a sec, I'll just put up the site, How to Go Vegan. Let me see. Here we go. This is the site I'd like you to check out. It's a podcast I did. I did it in 2016. It's relevant now, but it's got a whole lot of vegan education, ethical vegan education podcasts on it, which covers a whole lot of different issues. But it's all about ethics, and it does have nutrition on it too, which is very interesting. I've managed to collate a bunch of stuff from the nutritionfacts.org thing. And I hope that you'll check it out. And one day I would love to interview Dr. Grieger from nutritionfacts.org, because the science-backed information on that is truly convincing. It's just amazing. So, but anyway, I'm going to leave it here. I'm really kind of carrying on. So thanks so much for watching. And I hope that you will check out howtogovegan.org. And next time I hope to talk about backyard hens. We often hear people, I'll hear people say, "Oh, I don't eat eggs from, the battery hens or the whatever." I get it from, I actually have chicken, they'll say to me, "I have chickens myself and they're treated very well, and I use their eggs." And I'm going to talk about that next time, and the issues with that, what really happens in that regard, and the whole property status sort of thing. So anyway, that's all I want to say. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you'll join me again. And I also do some other, I do the anti-imperialist live streams as well through the Naked Empire. You can join that page. It's at Empire Laid Bare. I'll leave a link to that on Facebook at Empire Laid Bare. So the Naked Empire, that's something I do, and I hope to interview Abby Martin if I'm lucky. She's very, very busy, but I had a little chat with her, and we might be able to manage something in a month. So fingers crossed with that. And I have I post those. I also have a site called Faint Signals from Vega, and you can see that in the frame of this particular a live stream. Anyway, so thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time, and happy Mother's Day. Till next time. Bye for now.